Alright, so today making a new scale, set of scales actually, for my Swiss Army knife. This is a 58 millimeter. It was a manager, but really now that I took the pen off, it's no different than a Rambler. So what I've done is I've already made one, and it actually stays on there a bit, but I will eventually apply glue. I can show you what it looks like underneath there, and I'll show you how we did that by making another one that'll go on this side. Now, the first thing to consider is the thickness of the material you're going to use. I have a piece of cherry here that I cut a while ago for some other project, and this was scrap that was left over, and it's a nice thickness. You can see there, it's actually, by the time I'm done sanding and everything, a little bit thinner than the original scale there that was on the tweezer side of the knife. So I like that material, and I like how it's gonna lay on there. So you can do whatever works for you, but this is what I'm using. So what I'm using as my initial template is the scale itself that I popped off previously. And I'm going to try to determine which side I want to be my face side, and I think this is going to be my face side. So I'm going to put that down, and I will trace my scale using just a pencil. And I am not going to put in the tweezers or the toothpick, because I'm going to go a little too thin for those to fit. There we go. Now I'll take that over to the bandsaw and cut roughly out, kind of along those lines. And then on the sander, I will actually come to the line so that I'm a little bit more accurate than on my bandsaw, because I got a rough cut blade on the bandsaw. And the sander will get nice and close to those lines and be good and smooth. So I will go do that. So this is the roughed out scale for one side, and as you can see, I didn't go straight to the line, and it's a little sloppier on the edges. I plan to hand sand once I get the depressions cut for the pins to sit in. So the way I'm going to mark those, there's a lot of ways you could probably do this. You could probably ink up the pins with a marker or something and then set it on there and get the idea where those are going to go, or whatever, I don't know, something like that. But the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to set it on there and line it up just the way I want, and then I'm going to just put a little clamp on it to mark where those pins are. You can see I got a little burn on the sander there, got to replace the blade. I'm going to mark where the pins are just with the pressure from the pins. So I want to make sure that I get it lined up just right. Squeeze it down a little bit. We're not trying to punch the holes here or anything. We're just trying to create some depressions that we can then use to know where to go. So that ought to do. Take the pressure off the clamps, and let's take a look at our handiwork. There you go. 4 perfect little holes where we need to punch. So what I'm going to do to take those out is I actually have a drill bit. This is an old 1/8 inch, I believe, drill bit that I actually took to the grinder and made flatter. Normal drill bits have more of a point, at least most of my drill bits do, and I don't want it to be too pointy because I don't have enough wood to work with to allow much space for that. So I really need almost a flat drill bit to drill that out. I'm sure there is such a beast, but I don't have one, so I just made one out of an old one. So anyway, I'm sure there's a lot of other ways you could do this. You could hollow it out with a small chisel or gouge or whatever you might have. Knife blade even would do it if you were patient enough. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little drill bit, and I actually have it chucked up in my hand drill, so I will do that, and let me reposition and we'll do that. Alright, so for the drilling, I just have a piece of scrap leather here that I'm placing on the edge of my bench. Then I will place the scale on top of that, or right on the edge, and then I'm going to use one of those little clamps to clamp it to the edge of the bench. I'm sure I could clamp this in 1,000 ways. This is how I'm doing it. So, and now my hand drill, and I'm going to do my best to get centered on those little holes. And just very slowly take a couple of turns. Don't want to go too far and come out the other side. Oh, there we go. Sits much better now. Clean there. Clean there. Nice and flush all around. So now, to finish this baby up, since we have the drill hole, it's drilled out, excuse me. I'm gonna use the actual knife to mark on the wood the rest that I need to take off. As you can see, I can use that outside spacer or scale or whatever those are to mark what I need to take off. And looks like my scissors and my file are in the way, so we're going to open those up so I can mark this. So now we're going to have a nice accurate idea of where everything needs to be, because we've already punched the holes. I found that if you, well, I must not be accurate enough to mark everything up before I punch the holes, because then when I go to put the holes in, everything shifts and I end up in a bad spot. So now I have nice lines to sand to, so I know exactly how to make it flush to the sides.
As far as sanding goes, I have the lines that I like to sand to. I've already done a little bit there. I tend to use, for this situation, just a sanding block with some sandpaper. That's probably about 220 grit or so. I'm not even sure at this point, but smooth enough that it isn't too bad, but also removes some wood. So all I do is just, sand down to the lines, get as close as I can. I actually want to take a little bit of the thickness out of the ends, so that it's got a little bit of a curve, thinner at the ends, a little bit thicker in the middle. I think that just looks a little better, aesthetically speaking. So just gonna hit it on the sandpaper. Well, I am happy with how those are looking. So now I'm actually going to put my mark on one of them, and my maker's mark. And I do that with a wood burner. You wouldn't have to do anything to it, being that it's a Swiss Army knife. A lot of people would probably want to put some kind of cross on it or something like that. Whatever floats your boat. But I'm going to burn in my little symbol here. So let's just kind of freehand it, but hopefully I don't mess it up. Okay, time to put the scales on. So what I have here is a two-part epoxy, and I think it's probably the best adhesive option for putting these on. You need something that's going to be pretty darn strong, and super glue is too, too brittle. Rubber cement doesn't seem like a very wise option. Gorilla Glue is
gross and expands out of places. So I think this is the best. So all I do is you gotta go light. You don't want so much that it's going to squeeze out and end up on the, you don't want it to end up on the blades, you don't want it to end up on anything other than the scales themselves. So I roughed up the metal a little bit with some sandpaper to hopefully give this a little better adhesion. Probably you could just put this on the tops of the pins and that'd be enough to hold it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put enough to hold it all the way around. It'll also help it sit more flush to the outside layer there. Anyway, that's probably more than I need. And I don't know if I should be wearing gloves or not, but not worried about it. So, that's one side, and that's the side that I want this on. So we'll line that up, press it down, and doesn't look like I got any squeeze out, which I think is good. Well, maybe just a little bit right there. Yeah, I have to clean that up before we let it sit too long. So anyway, let's do the other side and then we will do a little cleanup if we need to. If you aren't careful, you could epoxy your blade shut, which would be unfortunate. So don't go too crazy with your epoxy. Alright, so now, while the epoxy sets, I'm actually gonna put it in some clamps. A little bit of cleanup. What are we gonna use? Something pointy. How about this guy? Should be good to go. Now we're just going to let that sit till the epoxy finishes curing, which it says a full 24 hours, so that will be tomorrow. It's time to remove the clamps. This has been sitting for a good 24 hours. The epoxy should be good and cured at this point. So we'll take those off of there. Looks like I burnished it a little bit with the clamps. Nothing I can't clean up with a little sandpaper probably. But everything opens the way it should. And I have some nice thin wooden scales. I will buff that a little bit with some sandpaper just to make it all regular. Then I'll show you guys how I finish it. So I hit that with just a little bit of sandpaper to take out any crushed fibers that I probably got from the clamps as they were on there. And now I'm gonna wipe it down with a little bit of finish. You could do anything you want to finish it. I like oil finishes. If you were gonna use lacquer or a spray or something like that that might gum up the works, I probably would have wanted to do that before I put it on the knife, so that I wouldn't have to mask off the knife or anything like that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use Mahoney's oil wax finish. I used to just use straight walnut oil, actually from Mahoney. Is it Mahoney? Yeah, Mahoney. But I've started to use their wax blend. I think it maybe gives a little bit of better shine. But something to remember with drying oils, be careful with your rags when you're done. They will potentially combust if you're not careful, so you get just a little bit on there. As those oils dry, they give off lots of heat, and if you crumple your rags into a big pile, or even one rag, I guess, I've seen videos where that happened, they can combust. They'll build up enough heat to actually start on fire. So when you get done using a drying oil, make sure you lay your rags flat somewhere safe to dry, so that you don't gotta worry about starting a fire. My shop's out in my garage, so I just find a flat spot on the concrete where there's no wood chips or anything and lay out the rags to dry there. And then once they're completely dry, if they're reusable, I reuse them. Otherwise, then I put them in the bin. And I would say that's good. Now that oil and wax will take a while to dry, but it's pretty harmless stuff, so I don't mind using it and or carrying it, and then I can always apply another layer later if it needs it. But I'd say that looks pretty good. Thanks for watching.